Thank you for tuning into our podcast, Canal Days, What Life Was Like in the Industrial Connecticut River Valley of Massachusetts. I am your host, Carrie, and joining us today is Holyoke's very own local historian and creator of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Cologne. He personally offers and leads public and private tours, as well as presentations of historical sites within communities throughout the state of Massachusetts. Currently, the communities he has chosen to focus on this year are Holyoke, Chicopee, South Hadley, and East Hampton, and also Granby and Amherst as well. His tour spotlights the local canals, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as various parks, streets, and selected historical houses within each community. In today's episode, we'll be discussing the book Silk by Luther Hooper. So, how is the book Silk broken down?
It's broken down into many chapters that will slowly get you to understand how silk was produced from the cocoon state, and then how it was changed over to thread, and then fabric, and then how you could make designs into it, some colored, some not. And it's a wonderful book. It's from about the 1930s. And we're going to talk about today the series that it's from and some of the other books. And are the illustrations helpful? Yeah. And then who might find this book very useful? I did, because I had to give a presentation on the Skinner Silk Mill in Holyoke. And so I had to know what they were doing. And so I got a lot of pictures of the Skinner Silk Mill and then try to interpret what they're doing by reading this wonderful book. Now, this author has written other books on very technical subjects. So, this was on silk, but he wrote others on cotton and so forth. All right, so today we're going to talk about this book and how it's broken down. And so the best way to understand it is when you want to make silk, you start with the silkworm. You feed it, right? And then you have it grow its cocoon. And then from there, you start that little thread that you can wind off it. And that little thread is actually a mile long and one continuous seam, all right? Because the silkworm doesn't break that seam as it makes it. And then you take that and you start to wind it onto bobbins, and then you thicken it up, because you don't stay with just one thread. You actually want to make it into 12, and then with 3 threads of 12 fibers each, you triple it, so it goes to 36. And then you keep doing what you have to do. At that point, you might want to color it with dyes, and you also might want to consider the patterns you're going to use. But mostly, what are you going to do to get fabric? Well, you got to have a warp and a weft. A warp is when you have this long silk threads lined up with each other very close. You remember they're 36 times over of the thickness of that you started with, because you did all this winding around itself. And then you want to make them exactly parallel. And then you got to weave the thread through it mechanically. And so you got to lift the thread in 2 places, one up and one down, and send a shuttlecock through there. Now, it sounds easy, but there's 1,000 years of knowledge there. And this book also talks about the history. And then lastly, it talks about how to put patterns in. Most especially, you had to use these cards that would put the different colors thread through a different hole. In the other holes, you might put the white, some of the blue, so forth. This was actually the first computer card, which led on to the first computers. So the whole model of this has been known for about 200 plus years.
And the book is part of the Pitman's Common Commodities and Industries. What other books are in that series?
Any production that you can think of on fibers or metals or paper are in this series. They were commissioned in the mid-1930s, and they went through these different industries and explained how is paper made, how is cotton made into clothes, how is leather made, how is iron smelted, right? And there's about 100 titles in this series, and they all have to do with mechanical changing over these processes. Remember, in the 1930s, a lot of these mills were still going full blast, and they wanted people to be able to understand what they were doing. They're small books, but packed into those tiny books is a lot of knowledge. And through the illustration and through the excellent textural material, they go through them, and you, by the end, understand what's going on.
Quickly, before we continue with the rest of our interview, to find out more information or sign up for any of his various tours, you can check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org. And there you can find videos and podcasts of the stops along each of his tours, as well as photos and text of the historical sites throughout as well. And for private tours and other inquiries, you can email him directly at bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. And his tours make for fun, educational outdoor activities for families and group parties. So getting back to our interview, are the illustrations in the book helpful?
Yes, they are wonderful. Anytime that the process gets very complex, they start to use these hand-drawn illustrations. And sometimes they're actual pictures of an apparatus that might need. And sometimes these are pictures of the finished products or nearly finished products to help you grasp the concept. So, packed in these tiny books with pictures and text, you get a wonderful grasp of how any material is being made. And the list of topics is just incredible in the series.
And what is this book useful for?
Well, this particular book is useful to understand any production process of silk, anything about the silkworm, what it eats and how it lives, anything about the silk industry, anything about the history of silk, anything about the geographic area where silk was produced. And sure, Korea, Japan, and China were the main countries, but Italy got into it a little bit later. And then what was the modern history of silk like, how they mass produced it and changed over. And the others in the series are very useful also. I used the silk book to learn how silk was made because I had to give a presentation on the Skinner Silk Mill, and that was of great help. It was more useful than any other book on silk because it got down to the nitty-gritty of what was happening at each step. And so it's very technical, but still at the same time very easy to read. So Luther Hooper has a great way of writing statements where it's kept at intermediate level ability of technical knowledge, but also he gets a lot packed into his sentences, and so I consider him a wonderful nonfiction writer.
And thank you, Robert, for educating us on tours and historical topics of your expertise. And we want to thank our listeners for tuning in. And you can check out a large selection of our other podcasts on his website, as well as on SoundCloud.com. And be sure to stay up to date with videos and podcasts posted daily.